All right, I have a case of the nerves, so I'm going to pace a little bit, but I am going to ask you to participate for a second. So what I want to talk about is our perspectives. So our perspectives on how we approach our work. So not your jobs. I feel like our jobs are just a platform for whatever you think your work is in the world. And especially now, since our jobs are like 1 to 2 years before we get bored and move on. So I want to talk about our perspectives as we approach our work. Something that I think is important in Detroit right now as our city starts to change, the demographic starts to change, and then the culture starts to shift. So there are a lot of people working on affordable housing and how we keep people physically in place. But I think what is also important to talk about is how we keep our culture in place. So something that I vowed to do is anytime I'm in charge of an agenda or I'm doing a presentation, I'm going to infuse some Detroit culture into it. So I'm about to do that now. And I told my friend Tosh I was going to call on her. So Tosh, can you shout out what is the official, well, when you're done taking your picture, we have an official Detroit greeting. So Detroit is about 80% black. So 8 out of every 10 people in the city is a black person. And there's a way that we greet each other on the street when we're talking. So Tosh, how do we do that? What do we say? What up, though? Exactly. So what I would like everybody to do is if you could turn to your neighbor and kind of give a half bro hug and say, what up, though? Thank you, Tosh. Now I feel like you know one of our Detroit secrets. Don't ask anybody about the origin, huh? Is that the first time you've ever used it? What? Awesome. So anytime you go to an event that a native Detroiter is doing, like we have poetry slams, open mic nights, anytime there's a performance by local Detroiters, they might open with that. Now you know what that means. Don't ask me about the origin. I've never known where it came from, but it's just a thing that we've always said. So entering spaces respectfully. Slides. So I made this so we could start to think about the lens through which we view things. A lot of times when people come to Detroit, they say it's a blank slate. I think a lot of that has to do with the things that you think are important, the places that you came from, your own value system. Be thinking about the lens through which you view places when you enter them. So this is another lens that people often see when they look at Detroit. So you're looking through this lens, all you see is an empty lot, a blighted building, and people think that that's all we have. But if you look at it through a different lens, which I'll hope you'll start to shape through the course of this presentation, you can see a lot more than just that. So a lot of times when we talk about development in Detroit, economic development in particular, these are the images you see. So corporate leaders with their special shovels. I worked on a groundbreaking that a foundation did. They're actually special shovels that you have to order to do groundbreakings. Only certain people can touch them. Only certain people can be in the picture. But this is a groundbreaking at a historic site. We had a historic retailer, Hudson's, for a really long time. They tore Hudson's down. There's been a vacant lot on top, parking underneath, and Dan Gilbert is about to erect the tallest building in Michigan on this space. And not good or bad, but these are the pictures that you usually see when people are talking about economic development. What I would like to think about is these kinds of shovels. So these are people in a community that run a community garden. They give food to people in the garden. They go to Eastern Market. They sell it on the weekends. That is also a form of economic development. And this is happening at a much larger scale than the development you saw before. So the previous development has a lot of money behind it, but really just impacts what's happening in that downtown central business district area. People are doing this all over the city. And I would challenge you to think that people doing economic development can look like that. Also, here's another guy in Detroit, brilliant in economic development. His name is Malik Yakini. If you don't know him, you should look him up. That's right. Malik Yakini has, for a couple of decades, been working on putting together a food co-op. So we finally confirmed some funding. You can buy in at a couple $100s a head, or I believe less. but it's a participatory way in which people can be engaged in an economic development project on a larger scale. So when we see those pictures of people with the shovels and the suits and they're downtown, this is also what someone can look like who is doing quality economic development, inclusive economic development. When we think about arts institutions, anytime people talk about the arts in Detroit, they're usually showing you pictures of the DIA, which is a fabulous institution. I think our new director has a lot more focus on inclusion and getting more people to the institution than previous directors. So I worked with a group of fellows, Challenge Detroit, and they actually did a survey as part of our downtown development authority, and they went to people and they were like, so this millage is passed, everybody can go to the DIA for free in the Tri-County area, why don't you, native Detroiter, ever go to this institution? So there were people that said they didn't feel comfortable downtown, they thought the venue was too pristine, they didn't feel welcome. So even though we have a giant arts institution like this, which is free for everybody to go to, everybody in the cities does not feel like this is what represents art for them or is a comfortable space for them to be at. So I would challenge you to recognize things like this as art. So this is a photograph from some graffiti in an alley, and if you don't have a trained lens, that's what you would see it as. But it's actually part of a larger community development art project called the Alley Project. That's what TAP stands for. So my friend Eric Howard, who grew up in Southwest, engaged some of the neighborhood kids to do art on different garages in the alley, and they've cataloged this stuff. So all of the art pieces have a number on them. There's a catalog. You can look up who the artist is. You can look up what it was influenced by. You can look up what it stands for. But being able to look at something like this as art comes from changing your lens. Oh, I forgot I put this slide in here. So actually, our administration started targeting street artists. So this is actually a Shepard Fairey piece that he did on a building. And our current administration, not to disparage them, but just to get you to think about how different people look at different kinds of art. So usually when you hear about neighborhood cleanups, you think of groups like this. It's usually grant funded, there's a big organization behind it, people have on matching t-shirts, it's really just centered around like a one-day thing, it's got the photo op, it's got the media there, and you think that, wow, these are the people that clean up neighborhoods. I actually remember having a conversation with my parents, and they're like, yeah, let the city go to the new folks, look at how they're cleaning it up. I'm like, Mom, Dad, when the guy next door died, you were out there raking the leaves, you were shoveling the snow. Like, you are a person that does cleanup, but you're never featured. So even, like, my parents had a vision that these are the only people that do the cleanup, and they were people that do cleanup. So usually people that take care of neighborhoods look like this. You're never going to see these people getting an award. They're not going to wear matching t-shirts. The media isn't coming out to cover them. They're just people who want the place that they live to look nice. And this guy. So I ran a nonprofit on the northwest side of Detroit. This guy's name is Champ. I actually don't know his real name, nickname Champ. But he actually has lived in the neighborhood since 1967. He's like in his 80s, and he walks around picking up trash. People are like, hey, you should interview Champ. I'm like, let me talk to some old-time residents and see what people want to see here. They're like, you got to talk to Champ. And I'm like, hey, Champ, what's going on in the neighborhood? And the thing is that he thinks is important is keeping it clean. So him in his 80s, by himself, no equipment, no fancy uniforms, no fancy bags. He's just out there picking up trash because he wants his neighborhood to look nice. And he's been there 40 years. So when you read articles about where Detroiters hang out, you might see places like this. I'm sure you've been here. Has anybody been in the Foundation Room? It's a beautiful building. But kind of formulaic. So it's got the reclaimed wood. It's got the Edison bulbs. It's got the craft cocktails. And don't get me wrong, I'm bougie as hell and I love those things. But I have I'm not gonna front. But I have a really wide perspective on where I think people hang out. So these are the stories that you hear all the time. Everyone's like, look at this new bar and how it's revitalizing the nightlife scene. However, we also have things like this. So this is, sometimes I hate giving away the Detroit secrets because I think they'll jump the shark. But anyway, there's an empty lot on the east side called John's Carpet House. There used to be a building that actually had a carpet house in it, but now there's a vacant lot. every Sunday in the summertime. They have blues bands play there. People are selling drinks out of the back of their car. People are cooking up ribs. You can just go, you bring your blanket, you bring your lawn chair, you sit and listen to music, you can dance. But if you're really thinking broadly about what people do for entertainment, it looks more like this here. And there are tons of vacant lots with no names where you'll see people at a folding table, folding chairs, they're playing cards, they're having drinks. There are a lot of different ways that we enjoy ourselves besides the mainstream ideas, which are also nice, to reiterate. Also, your lens shapes how you might look at the news. So if you were to read this article, you'd be like, wow, fewer people are living in poverty in Detroit. The last time we saw poverty rates this low was 2008. However, our poverty rate is 35.5%. So maybe they're lower than before, but that's almost 40% of our population that's living in poverty. So if we have 700,000 people here, 4 times 7, almost 300,000 people are living below the poverty line, which is $25,000 for a family of 4. So I remember first coming out of college, I didn't know how to make money. I tried to live off of 25 grand. It's hard enough for one person, but if you can imagine a family of 4 trying to live off that, that's 40% of the people here. So when you're reading the news, let that shape your lens. These guys. Again, nothing wrong with new development, nothing wrong with these guys, but if you read anything about Detroit's comeback story, they're heavily featured, and again, nothing wrong with that. So, is there anybody here who doesn't know who these people are? Oh, shit. So one is the mayor, and you're not from here. I know, but I thought the word that went out was this word. So one is the mayor, and then one is like our shadow mayor, Dan Gilbert. So, and that's not my copyrighted term. There was actually an article in like City Lab or something, and it was like top 10 mayors in the US. And for Detroit, it said Shadow Mayor Dan Gilbert. I was like, oh, so that's a thing. But when you hear the stories about our comeback, people always think these guys are the experts and are doing all the stuff. And they're doing some stuff, and again, that kind of change isn't bad. So in keeping with the theme of this conference, though, is it really inclusive? If we've still got that 40% of people living in poverty, like, are these guys focusing on the right things, given all the money, access, social capital that they have? So I want us to rethink what an expert looks like. You know Baba Jaman? So Jaman Jordan is amazing. So anytime you want a real in-depth history tour of Detroit, Jaman knows literally and figuratively where the bodies are buried. So he can tell you like that history that's on the official historic marker, but he can also tell you the story behind that and the historical implications of what happened at that space and how they lead up to today. But if you saw him walking around the street, you wouldn't be like, that guy's an expert. Like previous slides, you'd be like, yes, those are the people. They know all the things. But really, the experts in this town are this guy. That's what they look like. So reshape what you think when you're looking at people that you meet here. And I just threw together some bullet points because I think it's always better to kind of summarize. So these are points for shifting your gaze when you're entering a space. I think it's really important to be self-reflective, know who you are, know how your views were shaped, think about your family, think about the place you came from, think about the people you spend all your time with, where you're getting your media from. All of those things shape your lens. So be hyper aware of what you're bringing to the table when you're looking at a place or looking at a group of people that you don't know. Also do more listening, less talking. So in particular, in groups like this, you're experts, you're running companies. I think this is the kind of group of people, and myself included, that get told that we know the things, that we're very smart, we have solutions. So typically when you walk into a space, you want to give all the information you know. However, if you're doing place-based work, there's a person who lives there, kind of like that guy Champ, who is 80 and has been in the place for 40 years. He's an expert too. You can't get PhDs in a neighborhood, but if you could, he would have it. And his PhD is as valuable as most of our master's degrees. So more listening, less talking. Also, recognize lived experience as data. What's really interesting in doing community development work in particular, we always want to look at numbers, demographics, but people's lived experience tells a vastly different story than what you will find in the data. You can manipulate numbers to tell any story that you want. However, people's lived experience is real, but we don't value it as such. So start looking at people's lived experience as valid data. Recognize the non-conventional. So I showed you what a non-conventional economic developer looked like. I showed you what a non-conventional expert looks like. Start to identify those kinds of people in the places that you go to. It's really easy to just do a broad media scan or read something and be like, yes, those are the people doing the things. But really, they're not. There's some of the people doing the things, and they're doing some kind of things, but those aren't the only things, and they're not always the best things. Seek to add and not replace. So it's really tempting when you go to a new place that doesn't have all your favorite stuff in it, and you're like, oh my God, I should bring the things from the place I just came from into this place, and it'd be amazing. Amazing is subjective. Lots of people value different things. So if you're trying to bring with you what you brought from somewhere else, it might not be applicable to the new place you're in. So seek to add what's already going on, not replace it. And also identify and amplify who and what's there. Odds are any community that you're going to do work in has some really amazing people that have been there a really long time and are probably doing things that might not be what you're into, but for the people that are there, it's amazing and revolutionary. So identify and amplify what's already there. And just want to end on this one. So when you're entering a space, enter it this way, but not in a way where you see a blank slate, just where you allow space for your vision to be shifted. And that's all I have.